Welcome to the BOOKSTREAM. Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com, and Castalia House. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight we are doing something new. Tonight we're going to talk about books. And the interesting thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that we've been wanting to do this for a long time. I've been intending to get around to doing this for a long time. But it just didn't really work out. We were talking with a couple other folks, a couple of our authors, and the combined streaming technology is not quite where we'd like it to be. But watching, there's enough people interested in what we're doing. But it occurred to me that a lot of the newer followers, a lot of the newer subscribers, a lot of the bears are not really all that aware of what we're doing in the ebook, audiobook, and print book markets. And one thing that we've gotten into doing recently that you may not be aware of is that we are actually now selling audiobooks directly from our Archaven store. And it's been kind of shocking to see the response. We've had books on Audible now for 3 or 4 years. I think we've got like 45 books up on Audible. And some of them do fine. But for the most part, they don't do real well. The numbers that we sell are fairly trivial. And so we thought, what the heck, let's just try and experiment with it. And it was kind of shocking to see how many we sold right away. It was really kind of amazing. And so what I want to introduce to you tonight is one of our first audiobooks that we have for sale at the store. And to be honest, it's not the one that I would have chosen to begin with, because it's a pretty grim, pretty dark book. And we're not talking about the kind of grimdark that we mean when we talk about George Martin or something like that. And so anyhow, this is a book by a woman named Moira Greyland, and she is the daughter of an extremely famous science fiction author named Marion Zimmer Bradley. And it's been interesting to get to know her. I have to say that editing this book was probably the most harrowing professional job I've ever had to do. But the interesting thing about it, as you'll see in this video that I'm going to show you, some of you have seen this before because we turned it into a Voxiversity video, but it's also part of the audiobook. Moira asked me to write the foreword to it, and so what you're going to hear here in a minute is the foreword from the audiobook, The Last Closet, The Dark Side of Avalon. So without further ado, I'm going to mute myself for a second, and we'll play this for you. Again, this is a video that was made to accompany the foreword to the book. And the foreword to the book is obviously part of the audiobook. So this is the foreword to The Last Closet by Moira Greyland. Foreword. I read 4 or 5 of Marion Zimmer Bradley's books in high school. I started with The Heritage of Hastur, then read 2 or 3 more Darkover novels that caught my eye in the Arden Hills Library. While I didn't find them sufficiently entertaining to continue with the series, they were just interesting enough to inspire me to pick up a trade paperback of The Mists of Avalon, not long after it was published by Del Rey in 1984. I still have that much ballyhooed monstrosity, its long untouched pages now yellowing on a dusty bookshelf in the attic. The Mists of Avalon was a massive 876-page bestseller, heavily marketed as a feminist take on Camelot and the legends of King Arthur, and was critically hailed for being very different than the usual retellings of the classic tale. It was different, with its grim darkness and overt sexuality. The Mists of Avalon might even be considered a predecessor of sorts to George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones. I found it to be too much of a soap opera myself, although there were a few salacious sections that did serve to liven up the book considerably. But even as a red-blooded young man, some of those sections struck me as perhaps a little too salacious. While I can't say that I had any inkling of what the author's habits or home life were at the time, I can say that I detected a slight sense of what I can only describe as a wrongness from the book. Arthur didn't love Guinevere, but was pining away for his half-sister? Sir Lancelot was not only Galahad, but also Arthur's bisexual cousin? Instead of being a tragic love triangle, Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere were a swinging threesome? And Mordred was not only Arthur's son, but the product of incest knowingly orchestrated by Merlin for pagan purposes to boot. That's just weird and more than a little grotesque. I don't recall if I ever actually finished the novel or not, but I know I didn't bother reading any of its many sequels. I felt that I had given this vaunted feminist author a fair shake, and delved as deeply into Ms. Bradley's strange psyche as I wished to go, little knowing that what I dismissed as freakish feminist literary antics were merely scratching the surface on what was actually an intergenerational psychosexual horror show. 3 decades later, despite being a science fiction author and editor myself, I found myself increasingly at odds with the creepy little community known as SF fandom, which can best be described as the cantina crowd from Star Wars, only depressed, overweight, and sexually confused. I was also becoming increasingly aware of a wrongness that emanated from that community like a faint but unmistakably foul odor. There were rumors about the real reason behind science fiction grandmaster Arthur C. Clarke's bizarre relocation from Southern California to Sri Lanka. There was the arrest of David Asimov, son of science fiction legend Isaac Asimov, for the possession of the largest stash of child pornography the police had ever seen. There were the public defenses offered by many science fiction authors on behalf of the SFWA member and convicted child molester Ed Kramer. There was the naming of NAMBLA enthusiast and homo horror porn author Samuel Delaney as SFWA's 2013 Damon Knight Memorial Grand Master. And then, of course, there was the historical Breendoggle, a 50-year-old debate among science fiction fandom concerning whether a child molester, Walter Breen, should have been permitted to attend the science fiction convention known as Pacificon 2 or not. Believe it or not, the greater part of fandom at the time was outraged by the committee's sensible decision to deny Breen permission to attend the 1964 convention. Science fiction fandom continued to cover for the notorious pedophile even after his death in 1993. In Conspiracy of Silence, Fandom and Marion Zimmer Bradley, Martin Wyss wrote, "Why indeed did it take until MZB was dead for her covering for convicted abuser Walter Breen to become public knowledge and not just whispered amongst in-the-know fans? Why in fact was Breen allowed to remain in fandom, being able to groom new victims? Breen, after all, was first convicted in 1954, yet could carry out his grooming almost unhindered at SF cons until the late 90s. And when the 1964 Worldcon did ban him, a large part of fandom got very upset at them for doing so." The fact that fandom had been covering for pedophiles for decades was deeply troubling, and yet we would soon learn that this wrongness in science fiction ran even deeper than the most cynical critics suspected. On June 3, 2014, a writer named Deidre Sayers-Moen put up a post protesting the decision of Tor Books to posthumously honor Tor author and World Fantasy Award winner Marion Zimmer Bradley on the basis of Bradley's 1998 testimony given in a legal deposition about her late husband. When Moen was called out by Bradley fans for supposedly misrepresenting Bradley, she reached out to someone she correctly felt would know the truth about the feminist icon, Moira Greyland, the daughter of Marion Zimmer Bradley and Walter Breen. Little did Moen know how dark the truth about the famous award-winning feminist was, for when Moira responded a few days later, she confirmed Moen's statement about Marion Zimmer Bradley knowing all about her pedophile husband's behavior. However, she also added that her famous mother had been a child molester as well, and that in fact, Bradley had been far more violently abusive to both her and her brother than Breen. I will not say more about the harrowing subject of this book, because it is the author's story to tell, not mine. But I will take this opportunity to say something about the author, whom I have come to admire for her courage, for her faith, and most of all, for her ability to survive an unthinkably brutal upbringing with both her sanity and her sense of humor intact. Moira does not wallow in her victimhood, nor does she paint her victimizers as soulless devils. Indeed, her empathy for those who wronged her so deeply is more than astonishing. It is humbling. Her strength of character, her integrity, and her faith in a God she was raised to believe did not exist are almost inexplicable, particularly in an age where adult college students cannot face unintended microaggressions without the support of their university administrations, the campus police, and physician-prescribed pharmaceuticals. Her story is more than a triumph of the human spirit, more than a tale of survival, and more than a devastating indictment of a seriously depraved community. It is an inspiration to everyone, particularly for anyone who has ever been subjected to abuse or ill treatment as a child. Moira's message is clear. They can hurt you, they can harm you, and they can leave you with scars that last a lifetime, but they cannot touch your soul. Their sins are not your sins, and their shame is not your shame. And there is a light that is always waiting to heal those who summon the strength to walk out of the last closet and turn their back on the darkness inside it. Vox Day, December 2017. All right, so that's the foreword to the book. And as you can probably guess, intense parts. It was difficult to edit, mostly because it involved facing you don't want to believe to be true. And it was pretty awful. Moira didn't want to go into specific details for obvious reasons. But, there were a couple places where, I told her, I said, you've got to make the accusation absolutely clear. Hints are not enough. The case has to be precise and specific. Otherwise, it will be swept under the table. That's probably not off. There we go. Sorry. Yeah, the mic was cutting in and out. I forgot to turn off the other mic. So let me now play you. This is the book, and just so you understand that everything in it is substantiated, it's not a short book. The audio is about 14 hours, and some of the stuff in it is, for example, actual legal depositions. The story is pretty incredible. I mean, the amazing thing is that Moira not only had the strength to walk out of that horrific situation, to not only grow up with her sanity and her sense of self intact, but she was actually the one who called the cops on her father when he was abusing another child. She was not going to permit what happened to her to happen to others. And so now let me play you a little bit of Moira speaking with her own voice. I just read the foreword. I really don't do audio work. Let me play you a little bit of her own voice. Forward. I read 4 or 5 of Marion Zimmer Bradley's books in high school.
Chapter 4. The World's Weirdest Engagement, 1963. Mother stands for comfort. Mother will hide the murderer. Mother hides the madman. Mother will stay mum. Kate Bush. Mother stands for comfort. Hounds of Love, 1985. When my mother and father were preparing to move in together and get married, there was a scandal in the science fiction community about my father's sexual abuse of approximately 10 children. These were not idle rumors, but overt public acts with many witnesses. Some people were concerned that my mother would abandon him if she found out, and some hated him and wanted him gone, while still others hoped she would civilize him. My mother chose to defend him, both at the time and in her sworn testimony in 1999. She knew exactly what he was doing. I have mentioned fanzines before, newsletters written and mailed within the science fiction community. Fanzines were the primary way that people in science fiction communicated with one another back when there was no internet. One of these included a long article about my father's conduct, written by Bill Donahoe. I have included this article below, edited to remove in-jokes, repetition, and some things that would have only made sense to the people directly involved. Be warned that it is sexually graphic and more than a little upsetting to read. The original text appears in its entirety in an appendix. The Great Breen Boondoggle, or All Berkeley, is plunged into war, circa 1963, from a fanzine article by Bill Donahoe, synopsized by Moira Grayland. Should Walter...
All right, we don't need to get into that now, but I thought that it was a good selection to play because you can hear what Moira actually sounds like. She's a musician, and so she's got a really nice voice. In fact, we're actually planning on having her record some of our other audiobooks. The Breendoggle is something you can look up. If you don't know who Marion Zimmer Bradley was, she is probably the second most influential female science fiction writer ever. She is one of the few winners of the World Fantasy Award. At the time when this all first happened back in 2014, nobody wanted to believe her. I mean, no one wanted to believe her. So, what is she narrating? She's narrating. Oh, what other books might she be narrating? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe a Mind Programmed. There's a lot of other possibilities. We haven't decided yet. We would just recently talk to her about doing the other audiobooks, and she said she was interested. Anyhow, if you're interested in picking up the audiobook, which I encourage you to do, a lot of people say, hey, you don't have super chats, you don't have, you're not selling subscriptions to this stuff yet. If you want to support the stream, if you want to support Castelia House, and if you want to support Moira, pick up a copy of the audiobook. We even, it's priced very reasonably. It's priced at $19.99. The link is below the video on the channel, and the audiobook is 14 hours, and it also includes free copies of the ebook, and in both EPUB and Mobi format. And so, this is an experiment. Are selling the audiobooks directly, and so this is a great way for you to help support us because it allows us to stay independent of Audible and Amazon, and that allows us to publish this kind of stuff that no other publisher wants to touch. When the story came out, Moira was looking around to see who might be interested in helping her tell her story, and I can tell you right now, there was not much interest in the science fiction community. They were mostly in denial. And so, this is something that we took very seriously, and especially you bears. I know some of even the bears are wondering why Owen has been on the warpath to the extent that he is. But what you have to understand is that he knows. He absolutely knows. He doesn't believe, he doesn't think, he doesn't guess, he doesn't assume. He absolutely knows that this evil is real. And, now so do I. And that's why we take this stuff seriously. And in fact, this actually has direct connections to the very highest levels in Washington, D.C. right now. Let me explain how. The pedophile activity in the science fiction community, the rot in the science fiction community was pervasive. Walter Breen and Marion Zimmer Bradley are very far from the only ones. And in fact, about 12 to 14 years ago, Isaac Asimov's son, David, who attended all of these conventions that Moira was describing in that section, he was arrested, and he was found in possession of the largest collection of child pornography that the police had ever seen. And yet, he was released with no jail time, with a slap on the wrist, and was told not to drink alcohol. And guess who was the prosecutor who let him off? The prosecutor who let him off was Robert Mueller. The same Robert Mueller who is currently the special investigator in charge of investigating President Trump. The same guy. And in fact, a report has just come out that the convicted, I don't know if it was, I believe he was convicted of underage prostitution, of utilizing an underage prostitute. Brian Epstein was also given a slap on the wrist, and very recently it was determined that there appears to have been some connection between Robert Mueller when he was at the FBI and Brian Epstein. So here we have two confirmed examples of the, Swampy McSwampstein letting these monsters off very, very easily. And so, when you see how pervasive and how far this stuff reaches, Washington, D.C., Berkeley, California, it's astonishing. And so, I don't recommend that you pick up this audiobook. I don't recommend that you pick up the audiobook of The Last Closet because it's going to be so fun to read. But it is going to make it very, very clear to you what is actually happening in the world. It's going to make it very, very clear to you that the stuff that Owen is talking about is absolutely real. And what's possibly the most astonishing thing about it is the way that people that you think are relatively normal people just look the other way. They just turn the other way. They avert their eyes and they refuse to admit what is happening right in front of them. By the way, I should caution you, our online store is a European site, and about 15% of US credit cards get declined. just because your bank might flag it because they were like, what are you doing, buying from a European site? If that happens, all you need to do is contact your bank, tell them I'm making a charge for $19.99 or whatever it is that you decided to pick up. We do have 3 other audiobooks there, and we've got a number of digital comics and ebooks. But if you have a problem with a negative charge or a declined charge, please just contact your bank, tell them that it's legit, and then the next time you shouldn't have any trouble. And so, and if you continue having problems, then let us know. We'll see if we can arrange something else. But I think if you also want to better understand why it's important for good people to know about this stuff, why it's important for good people to face this evil and not avert their eyes and not turn away from it, I would suggest that you read some of the reviews of it on Amazon. You will find that people have found it to be very powerful, very significant, and strangely enough, even hopeful and uplifting. Because there is an aspect of, if this woman can go through this kind of experience and come out of it as strong and as positive as she has, then you can surmount the challenges that you're facing in your own life. It's not any sort of self-help. It's not any sort of self-help book, but it is something that is, I think, helpful, especially if you're somebody who struggles with belief, if you're someone who struggles with the reality of good and evil. And so, Joey Shabadoo, you're wrong. It's not blown out of proportion. The problem is actually considerably worse than you imagine. And so, there are people attempting to normalize this treatment. They don't believe they are harming people. A question from Ben. Milo gave up writing Despicable because of the threat of lawsuits. How did this author circumvent that? Very easily. It's all well sourced. The activities that she refers to, a number. I mean, her own father was repeatedly convicted. If any, nobody who is mentioned in the book would dare to bring a lawsuit against this woman, because she knows exactly who did what. So, James says, do you make money off the Kindle version? We do. But we do best, at this point, we do best with the audiobook purchased directly from us. We do best when people purchase directly from archavencomics.com. Static says, it's hard to believe this kind of sexual sickness has been covered up for so long. Like I said, I don't think that people understand that this goes back probably to Carthage. If you think about it, why were the Romans so disgusted with Carthage? Why were they so determined to completely eradicate it from the face of the earth? I mean, the Romans had been pushed to the brink of defeat before. the Romans had crushed many nations. Why were they so absolutely determined to salt the earth? Why were they so determined that Carthage must be destroyed? And I believe it's because Carthage was evil to an extent that shocked even the famously stoic Romans. Is the problem rampant pedophilia or rampant financial corruption? In this, I mean, they're both problems. They're both very serious problems. They may even be related problems, according to some people. But in this particular case, there's no financial corruption going on. You know, these are people who didn't really make a lot of money. And so it's all ultimately about the worship of evil. And there's nothing that evil likes to destroy more than innocence. There's nothing that evil enjoys preying upon more than innocence. And that's why it always comes down to the children. It always comes down to the way that evil wants access to the children and wants to be able to abuse the children without consequence. Let's see. The Israelites were tasked with eradicating the Canaanites. If the Phoenicians were descended from the Canaanites, as some theorized, the Romans did God's work. Well, in that case, that would be true. Somebody says, because Hannibal whipped them a few times could also be a reason. No, I don't believe so. The Romans were beaten by other tribes and other nations before. They were pushed to the very brink of extinction several times. They didn't behave that way. They were much more afraid of the Germans than they ever were of the Carthaginians. So I don't think that that idea makes much sense. Let's see. Is there such a thing as a national character? There appears to be, to a certain extent. Can this book be purchased outside of U.S. Europe? It should be able to. There's no, as long as the credit card company accepts the charge, there shouldn't be any issue. Gene Roddenberry, yeah, there were plenty of issues with Gene Roddenberry. In fact, there's some connection that nobody understands yet, but Star Trek fans, especially hardcore Star Trek fans, the type we would call Trekkies, are wildly overrepresented in the subset of people who are arrested for pedophile crimes. There was a policeman in one child crimes related unit who said that in over 100 arrests, they had only arrested one guy who did not have a big Star Trek collection. So there's clearly something wrong in that community. So Jager Tree says something fishy about that Will Wheaton guy. More likely, if you have paid any attention to Will Wheaton's poetry and so forth, I think it's much more likely that Will Wheaton was a victim than a victimizer. Let's see. Yeah, so anyhow, somebody just said they just picked up the audiobook and they said that the whole purchase process was really easy. That's great. Also, one thing that, for those of you who care about this sort of thing, one thing that you might appreciate is that the audio files are high-resolution MP3 files. So each chapter is a separate MP3, and we've got the downloads are pretty fast. We've got a nice fast server, and the quality is quite good. Obviously, if you're just listening to it in the car or something, it's maybe not going to be that big a deal, but the quality, I'm told, compares very favorably to Audible. And so Bearerism says, can't even imagine paying attention to Will Wheaton, let alone his poetry. So Gareth says, I found the purchase process somewhat confusing and have been unable to listen to it as an audiobook. It's very simple. Click on the link, save the MP3. You do that for each of the links, and then you open it up in any audio player that plays an MP3. Go ahead and send me an email directly if you're having some problems with that. So, but they're just MP3 files. You don't have to load it into any special app or anything. Any audiobook reader will do. Any MP3 player, Winamp, you name it, it will work fine. Let's see here. Hilarious watching that episode of The Next Generation where they show a future Will Wheaton and he was a masculine buff guy. Yeah, that didn't turn out so well. Ron says, I have liked Will Wheaton playing as himself on Big Bang Theory. Yeah, I have too. I don't like Will Wheaton, the individual. I don't like the SJW on Twitter. Okay, we're getting rid of this guy. Too easy to accuse anyone who simply... Okay, this guy is like weirdly concerned about accusations. Okay? This book is about convictions. Not accusations, convictions. All right? There are depositions where Marianne Zimmer Bradley admits knowing about her husband's sexual relations with underage children. Okay? So, Joey, get out of here, go to hell, don't come back, and do not even think about trying to defend child abusers here. And I'm pretty damn sure you're not going to be welcome to do it on Owen Benjamin's channel either. All right? I have no tolerance for people who try to excuse this kind of stuff, who try to claim, oh no, what if there's a false accusation? Okay? Every single individual that we know about in the science fiction community, Ed Kramer, Arthur C. Clarke, all of these people have had people claiming, oh, it's a false accusation. It's not true. There's no proof. And then all of a sudden, the proof comes out. So what did they do the next time there is smoke? Oh, there can't possibly be any fire. It's such a terrible accusation. We can't do... Okay. What do you do when there's smoke? Do you just ignore it under the assumption that there must be nothing there? I mean, it would be really bad if there's a fire. So we probably shouldn't check. We should just ignore the smoke. No. When there's smoke, you investigate. You look into it. And then you deal with it. So, Fozzie Bear has an interesting policy. Better 100 innocent men go to heaven than one pedo escapes death. Arthur C. Clarke, they try to claim that he was found to be, the accusations were found to be false. It's not true. The police looked into it. They've buried it pretty deep. But the police in, I believe it was Santa Monica, actually found that after he left California and went to Sri Lanka, he continued to stay in contact throughout with a number of confirmed pedophiles, some of whom were later arrested and convicted while he was in Sri Lanka. His only reason for being connected to them, these were not people, who were in the science fiction community. They weren't fans and so forth. And so, I like Arthur C. Clarke's fiction, a lot of it, especially his short fiction. I mean, heck, I publish one of his short stories in There Will Be War, and it's a great short story. It gives me absolutely no pleasure whatsoever to say that is almost certainly the case. But the facts are the facts. Static says, does Jordan Peterson still have a following after his Kavanaugh BS? Yeah, it's larger than ever. Jordanetics has made a difference to hundreds of people, but there are hundreds of thousands who are still following him. Do you have a theory why there's such a large percentage of pedophiles in the science fiction community and Star Trek community? Yeah, in fact, if you listen to The Last Closet, Moira explains that. She goes into some detail explaining that. She even talks about, and this is why it's so valuable and so important for any parent to read this stuff. She explains exactly how her father would groom his victims. And he would flatter the child's intelligence, and he would push science fiction on them. He's like, oh, you need to be reading science fiction. You need to go to these science fiction conventions and so forth. And the whole game is to isolate the kid from the parents. And that's something that's relatively easy to do when science fiction is involved, because not that many adults are into it. So James P. said, just bought the audio, downloading now. Intro sounds awesome. Thanks. That's literally the only audiobook recording I've ever done. Now I wonder if the satanic panic of the 1980s was meant to discredit and distract from real child abuse. So many rabbit holes. I believe so. Blown cover as cover is something that we see fairly often. Jilly Bear says, Jordanetics is incredibly well written and should give Peterson nightmares. Yeah, I think his nightmares are bad enough. Whatever nightmares he might have from Jordanetics, they would probably be an improvement on those he already has. Do you think Valve will ever become converged like Amazon? And if so, are gamers screwed? Yes, I do think it will become converged. I think it's already converging to a certain extent. Are gamers screwed? I don't think so, because GOG, Good Old Games, is not converged. Let's see. Yeah, and also that's something that is important. When you watch the video for the forward, you saw how it got very dark, but then it became positive and uplifting towards the end. I mean, granted, some of that is video rhetoric and so forth, but that's actually the flow of the book. Moira is a delightful person. She's got some difficulties and issues, from her childhood abuse, but she is, a good person. She's someone that you would enjoy talking to, hanging out with. She makes beautiful music. She's a harpist, and I think that as bad as it gets at points, if you stick with it, you'll see that it ends well in the end. It also has, I have to say this, one of the first things she describes in the chapter is both awful and hilarious. I mean, it was literally the last thing I expected when I started editing this. I'm reading it. I'm kind of like, gritting my teeth as a preparation to deal with this thing. And I was shocked to find myself laughing out loud. I mean, and if you listen to the audio, if you pick up the audiobook and you listen to it, you will see it. You'll know the point that I'm talking about because you just cannot believe it. Let's see. Is A Throne of Bones part of a series? Yes. A Throne of Bones is the first book. There's a smaller, much smaller novel that's a prequel that's called Summa Helvetica, A Casuistry of the Elvish Controversy. And then A Sea of Skulls is the second book. I'm going to be releasing the extended edition of A Sea of Skulls next spring. Let's see. Do you have a stream or video that explains maybe basically what your platform is and why some people try to discredit you as a white supremacist? No, I don't. But I think if you look up the 17,000 word interview that Bleeding Cool did with me, the one that was pulled down a day later and got the editor-in-chief fired, he goes directly into that. He asks questions directly about that. I mean, why do people want to try to discredit me as a white supremacist? Because white supremacist is a useful way to discredit someone these days. I mean, that's why I got kicked off Twitter. That's why we have no idea how long this YouTube channel will be permitted to exist. Which, by the way, is why I encourage all of you to also follow me on stream.me. This stream gets simultaneously streamed there. And, so we've got a backup already in place in the event that YouTube decides to target me because I'm stating facts about convicted pedophiles or whatever bullshit reason their trust and safety group tries to come up with. But it's the same. White supremacist is just the latest version of calling somebody racist, which was the replacement for calling men chauvinist pigs. It's just rhetoric. It's just a way to try to get people to not listen to you. It's a way to try to get people to not pay attention to you. So that's normal. Does paganism endorse degeneracy? Well, you can't really say that it does or not because it's too wide. It's too broad a spectrum. The early Christian fathers were quite respectful of those they considered the noble pagans, the virtuous pagans. But there is the difference between Christianity and paganism is that paganism simply doesn't have the spiritual brakes on it that Christianity does. You want to do whatever you want, you can find a pagan god who will tell you that's the right and moral thing to do. That doesn't work. I love how Owen Benjamin describes himself as a white enthusiast. Yeah, Owen is amazing when it comes to rhetoric. I mean, when he says that he could be a wizard, believe him. Conspiracy queries is one of the best original pieces of rhetoric I've ever seen. Because it completely undermines the rhetorical effect of the term conspiracy theory. When they call you a conspiracy theorist, they're trying to dismiss you. When you say, hey, I'm just a conspiracy queerist, why would you be against looking into something? How can you possibly be against skeptical inquiry? It completely undermines the very basis of the anti-conspiracy rhetoric. Any tips on switching from using affirmations to prayer? Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, there's a difference between trying to make something happen yourself. At the end of the day, do you pray, my will be done or thy will be done? And that's one of the hardest things to accept, especially when you pray for things and you don't get the positive answer that you want. See, conspiracy analyst doesn't work. It's not as effective. Conspiracy query works so well because it rhymes with conspiracy theory. The logic of rhetoric is very different than the logic of dialectic. Things like rhyme, things like flow, they matter. In dialectic, doesn't matter at all. Ascolti musica italiana. Mi piace Ajax. Not much, to be honest. I mean, I listen to Italian music in the sense that I like Vivaldi, but I don't listen to much modern. Although, to be honest, I'm not certain I listen to much modern American music these days either. People don't like it when I remind them Hollywood is all pedos. No, they don't. They want to believe that Rock Hudson is a straight, handsome man. They want to believe that the pretty girl next door is sweet and charming and innocent, and but Hollywood traffics in lies. Hollywood is one of the centers of deception on the planet. Let's see. Are Native American gods angels? No, I would not believe so. Let's see. Was just wondering if Vox advocated conversion therapy or anything. I don't even know what I mean, are you talking about trying to change someone's sexual orientation? I don't think therapy works very well except for maybe physiotherapy. So I'm very dubious about all forms of therapy. I find Cernovich far better than Scott Adams when it comes to applying rhetoric or persuasion. Yeah, there's no question. Scott analyzes it, but he doesn't actually do it. He likes to think that he does. He likes to claim that he does, but he's actually not very good at it. What he is very good at is he's a very good observer of the human condition. That's why Dilbert is so brilliant. But Scott's idea of persuasion is usually involves trying to convince you that he was right all along. He doesn't actually tell you anything useful ahead of time. Did Jordan B. Peterson steal his pen of light from his friend who committed suicide? No. He got the pen much later after that friend's death. How could the elites build pedophile rings without being busted by the feds? Well, obviously the feds are involved. I mean, if the elites are above the feds work for them. That's why Trump talks about draining the swamp. That's exactly the kind of thing he's talking about. Somebody asked about the dog. It's not good so far. It's not over yet, but at this point, we need something beyond medical intervention. So, if you're inclined to pray for things, please go ahead and say a prayer or two for Mazie. But yeah, it's not going great. Let's see. Daredevil season 3 when Fisk takes over the FBI. Yeah, it's kind of funny because they're trying to portray Fisk as Trump and portraying him taking over the FBI like the bad guys are taking over the FBI. But as usual, it's Hollywood. Hollywood lies. They're of their father, the devil. They invert. So when they're talking about Fisk taking over the FBI, they're really describing the opposite. Fisk has been in control of the FBI all along. I'm not sure why understanding that people that make a fortune engaging in make-believe would engage in deception is hard to grasp. No, it's very strange. Very, very strange. I'm not a fan of how people like Cerno and Spencer dispirit conservative voters by blackpilling everyone. Well, there's a reason why they talk about, hope being one of the Christian virtues. That is one of the differences between the Christian and the non-Christian, is we see the evil of the world, but it confirms our model. It confirms our belief system. It makes us stronger. Whereas, for folks like Cerno, and I like Mike a lot. He's been very helpful to me. He's given me good advice. I wouldn't be doing this stream right now if it wasn't for Cerno telling me to, stop being such a literary snob and a upper middle class pussy. Those were his exact words. And he was right. He was absolutely right. But, it's difficult I think it's difficult sometimes to find hope when you look around and you see so much material and spiritual evil in the world. So, anyhow, on that note, I'll let you go, but I hope you'll take a look. Arkhavencomics.com. You can see right on the main page there's a graphic of a blonde woman with headphones. It says Castelli House Audiobooks. Right now we've only got 4 of them for sale there. We're going to be adding more soon. In fact, Jordanetics is going to be the next audiobook that we will have for sale there, coming soon. And but for right now, I'd encourage you to have a look at picking up a copy of The Last Closet. The audiobook is $19.99. It comes with free copies of the ebook in EPUB and Kindle format. And it'd be great to see what you think of it. So appreciate you tuning in. Look forward to seeing you next time. And we will speak with you at the next Dark Stream. Have a good evening.